This is the GamesIndustry.biz Microcast, recorded on Monday the 5th of August 2024. I'm James Batchelor, Editor-in-Chief of GamesIndustry.biz. I am joined as always by Head of GamesIndustry.biz, Chris Dring. How are you, sir?
I'm alright. I think we've just both been on holiday.
We have both had a couple of... I had a couple of days off for childcare. You had a week off to be on a beach, which sounds glorious, I'll be honest.
I think I spent about 2 hours on that beach. I'm not much of a beach person. But the kids loved it, which is the main thing.
I can say, to be fair, you're just chaperoning them to the beach. It's not about what you want anymore.
No, I'm discovering this.
As a result of us being off, it does mean we are still catching up with the news this morning. So some of this will be a little bit off. Nothing happened. Nothing happened last week. Nothing happens in our absence.
Let me just check the website.
This will be a little bit off the cuff. We're going to be rattling these off a very handy website called GamesIndustry.biz, which has been covering things in our absence. So wonderful, wonderful team over there. It is financial season. We'll start with that. It's financial season. We're starting to get the calendar Q2 stuff through. For most companies, that's calendar Q1. There's
the boring quarter, as we like to call it.
The boring quarter. Well, you say that the boring quarter, but like it's kind of showing that last year it wasn't a boring quarter. No. So 2 stories we've got here to start with is Nintendo. Nintendo's Q1 profits have declined 55%. Switch is nearing the end of its life cycle, so we kind of expect that. Net sales were $1.6 billion, down 46.5% year on year. Net profit was $542.9 million, down 55% year on year. A big part of that, obviously, is last Q1 they had the Mario movie and Zelda Tears of the Kingdom.
Yeah.
We will delve back into that in a second. Similar comparison. EA saw income drop 30% to $280 million. So net income was $280 million, down 30%. Overall revenue was down 13% to $1.66 billion. Net bookings were down 20% to $1.26 billion. So down across the board, but EA did say it exceeded expectations because they were expecting a stronger decline because the previous year they had Star Wars Jedi Survivor, among other big releases. Chris, you were saying just before we recorded about how this shows that comparisons are completely pointless.
Well, it's difficult with the video games industry where you don't have a consistent release schedule. There's not always a big blockbuster in the summer, and there isn't always one at Christmas, and particularly in the market at the moment where it's all about live service. So yeah, EA had Star Wars last year, which was a hit. It was a real hit. Like, I think we forget about it in a year where there were really big hits. That was a pretty big hit, and so we didn't have that. So EA's numbers are down because they didn't have anything else. Nintendo last Q1 financial year Q1. Nintendo had probably its best financial. I don't know if they've had maybe the launch of the GameCube in the Europe. I don't know. It was a huge Q1 for them because they had that Mario movie, which, if you remember, it's now number 3 because Inside Out has eclipsed it. But it was the second biggest animated movie of all time. It was the second biggest movie of last year at the box office. And they had that, which also drove sales of Switch hardware. Nintendo released a Mario Switch, and then there was Zelda, which is the fastest selling Nintendo game ever, and also had hardware attached to it. Caused a huge spike in hardware sales, so around Q1. So their Q1 last year was incredible, and there was it was in their biggest game. This Q1 is the remaster of Paper Mario: The Thousand Year Door, or remake. Sorry, don't write in, fans. They
had like 2-3 days of sales of Luigi's Mansion 2 HD, another remake.
Yeah. That was their Q1 this year, which was quite weak anyway, but really weak compared to last year. I think Nintendo probably got a bit of difficult comparisons for the whole financial year, really, because the second Q2 looks a little strong because they've got Zelda, but they did have Pikmin 4 last year, and they also had that Zelda impact, that momentum that came out of that into Q2 last year. One of the most interesting stats, actually, from Nintendo's financials is the last quarter, Zelda Breath of the Wild outsold Zelda Tears of the Kingdom.
Really?
And that for me was like, I have this thing about Tears of the Kingdom where I think it exploded out of the gate, and partly because they oversupplied the market. I think it took a while, the momentum behind it dropped very quickly. I think it is like 15 million in the first quarter, and then it's now done 20, which 5 million over it's not bad, but it's not Breath of the Wild has managed to continue to pace, and so it feels like the legs of Tears of the Kingdom isn't matching what Breath of the Wild had, and I mean that was inevitable when we moved from one console to the other, but there does seem to be it isn't. Maybe it's because Tears of the Kingdom seen as a sequel, so people are going to be jumping into Zelda for the first time. They're jumping into Breath of the Wild over Tears of the Kingdom. I don't know. I've not thought too much about it, but I thought it was interesting, and I do
find myself wondering how many of those who bought Tears of the Kingdom have now gone on to Breath of the Wild. Like, that is quite the jump in terms of like how the gameplay works, like how the two games are a lot. In many ways, a very different experience. And if you've gone from Tears of the Kingdom, all bells and whistles, build your own mechs, etc., to the almost survival-like experience of Breath of the Wild, that must be quite interesting transition.
I've got Alex Calvin, who regularly writes for a site, calls it a Zelda Breath of the Wild DLC. But the experience of playing Tears of the Kingdom, the look and the feel and the music's all very similar, but the gameplay experience is so different. It's because it is a game where you're encouraged to basically work your... the reason is, interestingly, we're going to talk about the media later on, but guides traffic for Tears of the Kingdom from some of the websites that I know wasn't as good as people were expecting. So the media wasn't... And I think it's because the game it discourages guides or discourages... There's never one way to complete anything. The joy of it is working out, I can't work out how to do this, I'll jam it together with a few of these, I'll work my way through this puzzle, which is very new for Zelda, which used to be very prescriptive. And
what was the around shortly after launch? Like, most puzzles can be solved by just building a really big bridge.
Exactly, and I never built any mechs at all in my experience in that game. I never did any of that, and I spent 170 hours in it. But I did think it was interesting. Part of the reason why Breath of the Wild did so well is it was a game that people shared a lot. Right, so it was a game that people went, we've managed to make Link fly across one end of the map to the other by doing these clever things with the mechanics and stuff like that, and that caused a lot of YouTube videos and lots of people engaging in that. Tears of the Kingdom, I thought, was built the same way. You can build all these mechs, you can do all these amazing things, but it's possible you could have done too much in it. You know what I mean? Like, it wasn't constrained enough. You can do so much in that game that actually people didn't share. I don't know. It's obviously still doing very well. It's been a very hit. It's the second best-selling Zelda game by 100 miles. And I just thought it was interesting to see that Breath of the Wild is continuing to have more legs than Tears of the Kingdom.
And we are always in danger when Chris and I start talking about Zelda. So I'm going to move us back to topic. My closing thought on Nintendo is I'm very intrigued to see how next year's Q1 will do for them, because we still don't know when Switch 2 is out. Everyone is still kind of assuming a March launch because that's what happened with the original Switch. But as we established, I think people assumed it was going to be March this year. If Switch 2 is not till Q4 next year, they're going to have a really quiet Q1 next year. So
it depends. It depends when certain things are launching, because there's that they've announced. We do know some games that have got next year, right? We know they've got a Pokemon Legends game. We know they've got a Metroid Prime game. We know they're coming out on Switch. We're speculating they're probably going to be across generation, but we don't know. There's a couple. Those are two. I'd argue those two games. Metroid doesn't normally sell that well, but hey, maybe this is the one, right? So those two games, I'd argue, are bigger than anything they've got currently on the schedule for this year. Maybe even Zelda.
Yeah. No, that's fair. That's fair. One more note on EA, if I may, before we move on to another story. Obviously, it didn't have as big a hit as Star Wars Jedi Survivor, but they did have a hit in EA Sports College Football 25. First college football game in, I think it's well over a decade now because of the various rules, and not really got time to go into that, but rules about using likeness and so forth. There were a couple of interesting stats around this I found. I think it came out kind of ahead of the financial results. So 5 million unique players during its first week, 500,000 more people played it during the EA Play trial. CEO Andrew Wilson called the launch a monumental moment for EA. The story I found interesting, which came out ahead of the full results, was 2.2 million people played the game ahead of launch, so via early access. So I think, like, if you bought the Super Duper edition, you got early access for 3 days, and 3 days early access to the game. 2.2 million people bought that. That edition cost $100. It was like $99.99, and that, I'm always skeptical as to how much people want, how much people value, like, the sake of 3 days of early access. You can just wait 3 days for the game to come out and save yourself the best part of $30-40. But apparently no, like, 2.2 million people were more than happy to spend $100 on a few extra days of college football and all the extra stuff that comes with it, etc. I commented this on social media. I did someone say it's like, well, it's over a decade of pent up anticipation for a new college football game. But I found that really interesting that early access can shift that many.
Impatience
$100
is the biggest issue of modern society, but also the easily monetizable. Obviously, was it included in EA Play at all? In terms of like if you're a EA Play subscriber, you got early access as well.
There was a trial. There was a trial in early access. Bear with me. I will actually read the story on GamesIndustry.biz because it had a mention of that. 600,000 people played the game through EA Play ahead of launch, I believe. So. So that's their subscription service kind of working. Obviously, I don't believe they do day and date. So the full game is not available on. EA
I was just wondering if there was a way they could do it without spending the $100. It's worth, by the way, just to work. The game launched in July, so it's actually part of their Q2 financials. So they've let us know about this to give us a hint that Q2 might be particularly strong for them, and it sounds like it will be. It's wonderful. What a hit! What a little hit!
Yeah, it's good.
Love it. I love it. Just in a year where we're going, what's going to be the biggest game? We don't know, and then suddenly. EA College Football does it, and we're British. We know nothing about this weird
Absolutely
sport, but it's.
I barely know anything about our own football.
So it's So I just like EA is going to have a good Q2.
Yes, massively. Particularly because Madden usually arrives August, and
FIFA rocks up.
FIFA, EA Sports FC rocks up September. So hell of a Q2 for E3, EA. Moving on to one more financials result before we discuss other things. Microsoft's financials have come out. Sony's aren't due until this week. They're coming out on Wednesday. Microsoft showed... Microsoft's always difficult because it's the overall results for Microsoft, and that you get very little actual concrete financial figures for the gaming division. I mean, everything's up at Microsoft. Revenue, operating income, net income, all up 10 to 15%. Revenue totaled at $64.7 billion, but that includes everything Microsoft does. Obviously, usually cloud and all of its other software does particularly well for Microsoft. Looking specifically at gaming, we just have nebulous percentages, so we don't actually know what this represents. Gaming revenue was up 44%. Xbox content and services revenue was up 61%. Both of those were attributed to the acquisition of Activision Blizzard. Obviously, Activision Blizzard games are now counted as first party rather than third party. So, the ongoing success or the ongoing sales of Call of Duty Modern Warfare 3. I know it's not sold as well as previous Call of Duties, but it's still selling. It's still
selling more for Microsoft this year than last year.
Exactly. Yeah. So this year's going to be such a blip in Microsoft's results because it's the integration of Activision. Like next year, depending on how well Black Ops 6 does, there won't be as significant growth when it comes to game revenue, content services revenue. The one that struck out to me was the hardware revenue was down 42%. So Xbox console sales dropped 42%. Now, I actually covered earlier this year for the Q1, the previous quarter results. Hardware sales were down 31% year on year in the previous quarter, and that was at the time the steepest drop in hardware since the Xbox Series X and S launched in 2020. So this is an even steeper drop off. Now we have no indication as to how many fewer units that is, but you do have to wonder how much can it decline before they are selling naff all consoles.
Yeah, it's not their focus anymore, right? And it's not that they're giving up on hardware. I know. Look, Microsoft says this themselves, right? So I'm not being angry. They've lost the console war, right? They know they've been beaten. They can't compete with PlayStation. PlayStation have run away with this generation. They're basically keeping pace with PS4, a little bit behind. But as I wrote a piece recently, there's still a lot of people on PS4 still gaming to upgrade. Every major release that comes out on multi-platform games like Assassin's Creed, even Call of Duty, is going to be more of a bump for PlayStation than it is for Xbox, simply by they've got the audience. Microsoft still is supporting hardware because it's the best way of getting Game Pass into the homes of as many people as possible. There's talk about more hardware, more varieties of it. I expect, portable device to come at some point, and they're going to be pushing streaming. But it's the hardware being down is an issue in terms of distributing Game Pass to more people, but I don't think it's that much of an issue really in terms of what Microsoft's strategy is. But also the thing is with these numbers, we're talking about Nintendo and Xbox's numbers, right? Xbox's big games start launching at the end of this year. We start seeing a couple more of them, and then there's quite a few due next year. I know they're just delayed, avowed, but they've got Indiana Jones, they've got Microsoft Flight, a bunch of others, and then next year they've got Fable, and then you're starting to see like that. Remember about 5 years ago, Matt Booty said they wanted to launch a major Xbox game or an Xbox exclusive first party title every month. Every 3 months. We're getting to that point now. We're getting 4 or 5 big Xbox games a year. So it's got the products now. It's got plans around Game Pass. It's got mobile. It's got loads of things that it says it needed, and now it's about delivering on that. Sort of judging it before it's started delivering on it is a bit cruel. We're not even cruel. It's almost like it's not like interesting. Like next year's going to be interesting. And same with Nintendo. Like Nintendo numbers are down. Yeah, but it's 8 years of the Switch. We need a new Switch, and then we can start talking about whether Switch 2 is pacing behind Switch 1 and what's happening there. We can start talking about how things are going there. Whereas right now it's like, numbers are down, but it's weird malaise for both of them. So I think Xbox has.
I think for me, like the reason I latched onto that number is like that's the one that is.
It's comparable.
It's easier to interpret it because all the growth in revenue and content and services and gaming, like overall, as we've said, like is due to the Activision acquisition. They've already predicted that they're going to grow in the next quarter as well. I think the deal didn't come through till October, so it'll basically be pretty much until the end of this year. We'll be seeing favourable comparisons. It will be next year's Microsoft.
It's misleading in the sense that what we're doing is we're adding an extra business on top of it. If you take that business away, is Xbox growing? And I don't think I'm going to say anything shocking here. I think the answer is no. I think Xbox as a core business has declined. Its hardware sales are down. It didn't launch any big game in the first half of the year, calendar year, and the only game it launched in Q1 was Hellblade 2, which, as I commented before, did not chart very highly. So you've got I think it's Xbox is heading in the wrong direction, but it needs to get those games out, those big titles they've been working on, and I think they're going to come, and then we can start talking about it. Is it taken too long? I think maybe it has, but I love the fact they're going for it, and let's get behind them and see what happens.
Absolutely. Another numbers story before we continue. The Circana charts are in, so US spending charts for June. This was interesting. So spending is down 5%. Again, you're saying like things are down, numbers are down, etc. But 5%, as you sound like, not that.
That's a result.
That bad. Yeah, compared to what last June, you would have had the continued Zelda effect. There were some big games coming out. Final Fantasy 16, for example.
Diablo was the big one.
Diablo was the big one, obviously. Apologies. The big one this month, the top-selling game was Elden Ring, and that is entirely due to the Shadow of the Erdtree DLC coming out.
Which is a significant release, but it was just the one, yeah.
It is, and I always find that fascinating because obviously, like, DLC is... You assume primarily targeted at people who already own the base game. And this indicates that either people sold their copies of Elden Ring and then bought it back to get Shadow of Erdtree, or the release of Shadow of the Erdtree brought in a ton of new users into Elden Ring who intrigued to check out the DLC. So
it brings conversation and stuff around the topic. People start streaming it again. People go for replays. They sell. It has that sort of network effect. I mean, this is no different to how The Witcher and all those in other games did it over time. The Witcher is still a regular top seller. I think the IGN most backlogged game is The Witcher 3. There's loads of people who have copies of that game because they kept releasing it and kept releasing big expansions and additions to those games. I always thought Shadow of the Erdtree should be it could have been another game. From what I understand, it's massive.
I did wonder was the expandalone like you get with like Miles Morales or
back when we were kids, we used to call these games sequels. Expandalones or Spider-Man Miles Morales is a game. I don't care what
it is. I agree.
Spider-Man 1.5. No, this is a game. But but at the same time, you see results like this, and you can see why, because it keeps that world alive and people talking about it. And I'm quite impressed. It's quite a long. You think Elden Ring came out in February 2022, didn't it?
Yeah.
So it's a long old wait for the first DLC to drop, but it's obviously expansive. It's done very well, and I think 5% drop in June as a result. I actually think when you look at I've been looking at the overall numbers for the first half of the year. We did it a couple of weeks ago for Europe. It's not been that much of a drop. And I think when you consider there isn't been a Resident Evil 4 or a Star Wars, or I mean, there's been a couple of smaller ones. There hasn't been an obvious like a Zelda, Diablo. So only Helldivers 2 and stuff help with that. But for us only to be down, I thought if you told me at the start of the year we're going to be slightly down by the middle of June, I would say that's a result. And in fact, when you look at the lineup for the rest of the year, which includes a proper Call of Duty, I'm going to argue last year's Modern Warfare 3 wasn't one of those, a major Assassin's Creed game. Last year's Assassin's Creed was great, but it wasn't a major Assassin's Creed game. You've got a big Star Wars title, which, I have no idea how that's going to do, but it sounds promising from the previews that dropped last week. I think we might be in for some growth. Who knows? I'm not going to... Should I say... I said it out loud. Oh, no.
You said it out loud. Foolish. Right, before optimism derails this entirely, one last story to discuss before we get onto our main topic is... Bungie is the latest studio to lay off developers. 220 staff, 17% of their overall headcount have been affected. Bungie boss Pete Parsons said the cuts were needed to make substantial changes to our cost structure and focus development efforts entirely on Destiny and Marathon. I'll be perfectly honest. Various reports have come out in the wake of the Bungie, layoffs that. Anonymous member of staff, those affected, former members of staff, and so forth. A lot of questions about how the studio was run financially, whether it was kind of overstretching. There's a lot of stuff about. I think it's Pete Parsons, the very expensive cars he was having, while 220 people laid off. Kind of all we know concretely is that that this number of people laid off. This follows their acquisition by. Were they acquired by Sony last year? It was last year.
It was
2 years ago.
Yeah, it was.
Where does the time go?
It was part of that January of $1 billion acquisition.
Oh yes,
Bungie and Zynga and Activision. Yes. The answer is this: Bungie overstretched itself. Yes, the whole games industry has. And Bungie's got the two is hit. If you think about the big issues that are facing the games industry, you had the people who made a lot of money during the pandemic overextending themselves and investing into a lot of new areas, which Bungie did. And then you've got the realities that come out where there isn't actually that much room for many live service games, particularly new ones, which is a problem for Bungie making a load of new live service games. I think it's probably the right move, the right size in the business to focus on Destiny, which is obviously is their business. And then focusing on one new title and going really strong on that one, because you're not placing the bet around one title. It turns out another title is still existing. This is weird. There is one of the titles they were working on, they were incubating, they're going to keep alive, but they're giving it to their parent company, who are taking it and putting it in a different structure. I don't know if that's to do with the type of game it is. I don't know if it's because it fits somewhere. I have no idea why that is. That's a bit of an odd one for me. Why can't Bungie look after that one? Why is it having to go somewhere else?
That does seem weird.
So that's an interesting one. Maybe it's just purely to get the cost structure of Bungie right, and
maybe it might be to keep them focused. It's
because they're laying off the management structure. They're streamlining the business to focus on two titles. I think it probably is the right move. A lot of companies are doing this. It's just I feel Bungie's perhaps. Was one company that went more further than most and is being hit worse than most. The cuts are so deep that when they were talking about how they tried to avoid it, I don't think they were going to be able to avoid it. You know what I mean? Even the final shape, which is apparently their DLC, the expansion they just have for Destiny, is actually apparently very good, and saying that people were happy with it. So I'm not entirely sure what the magic bullet was going to appear and prevent this from happening. I don't know if Sony's got involved, because that was the big talk, wasn't it, about them coming in and forcing things out, and we'll take this and move this about. And some people have been moved some jobs elsewhere, so it's not been entirely on cuts. But yeah, look, I say this a lot. I don't know this is not a Bungie comment. This is just genuine comment of people who are overinvested in the pandemic. It's sometimes hard not to overinvest if your competitors are. It's sometimes difficult. If your competitors are increasing the salaries of all their staff, and you want to retain your staff, you're going to have to do the same thing. And if your competitors start making their teams stronger to be able to output updates and stuff for their games quicker, you're kind of going to have to start doing the same thing yourself. This is, Destiny is going to be one of those games that spiked massively during the peak of the pandemic, and people played online to connect together, and then dropped off afterwards, and costs were going up. And this is the whole industry issue affecting Bungie. And obviously it's a big company, and lots of people, nobody's immune to criticism. In hindsight, everyone had done things differently, but it's really difficult when the industry, nobody operates in a silo. Bungie was not operating just in its own way, based on its own things. It was reacting to what was going on in the market, and what was going on in the market when it made all these investments was a lot of high growth, high competition from its and that's what it was doing. And now it has to react to what the realities is now, which is the opposite. That sounds like I'm defending them, but I don't know the ins and outs of exactly what projects they'd commissioned and how much money they were spending on loads of things, or how many cars Pete Parsons bought. I obviously don't know, but it's not as simple as just saying that all these companies, why did they not see this coming? I do think there is a truth to that. Like, I think, we were writing about this during the pandemic, like, this isn't going to last.
Yeah.
And then when it hit, I had a few people say to me, well, you can't plan for no growth. And I'm like, yeah, but you were going to get no growth, so you kind of had to. And I couldn't. You
can't plan for no growth, but you can at least prepare for decline.
Yeah, and I guess some companies did. Like, when you're talking about the layoffs that happened earlier last year, those layoffs were happening before they needed to happen. They weren't making them because they needed to survive the next quarter. They were making them because they saw something coming. We had investors were telling us that they were telling their people they'd invested in, the money that we've given you, try and make it, if you only plan that money to last you 2 years, see if you can get that money to last you 3 years. They were making these advices, the investors were making this advice because they could see this coming. And I think Sony's gone through this, right? Sony were making, I can't remember the number now, loads and loads of live service games, and they've looked at the market and gone, actually, and we said it at the time, is there room for all these live service games? And Sony was going, yeah, and then 6 months later went, no. And that's why we've lost London Studio, and it's why there were cuts at some of these other companies, and it's why Bungie are making cuts. There just isn't enough room for all these games. But Bungie's got the infrastructure to support more than one, so they're making a second one. I think it makes sense for them to I think what they're doing makes sense. It's just whether the journey to this point was necessary, I'm not sure.
We finished with one more story about cuts and closures. I say finish, like we're almost certainly now at the usual Microcast length, but there's been so much for Chris and I to catch up on. We're going slightly over a bit today, so this one we're going to spend a little bit of time on. GameStop has announced that it is shutting down Game Informer, the magazine that's been running for 33 years. Staff were reportedly called into a meeting on Friday, August the 3rd, informed of the closure. Entire team has been laid off. Severance packages are in place. A statement was kind of put out on social media thanking everyone for years of support and so forth, and announcing both the site and the magazine are shutting down. So it's not just the magazine, it's the entire publication. This is sad, honestly. Like I've seen so many people kind of lamenting this over the weekend, and I think it lends itself to the kind of the broader conversation of where games media is at. Game Informer, one of the longest running video game magazines, possibly the longest running video game magazine in the world. I certainly can't think of any others. PC Gamer and Edge have only been going 30 years. So Game Informer.
How long had CVG been going before that closed down?
Oh, I don't know, but I mean, one's longest running that is still around today, and even then, video games magazines around today, I get this thing, like I go into WH Smith or a news agent or whatever, and I remember the times when there were 10, 15 different games mags, and you look now and there are 3 if you're lucky. In the UK, at least, you're 3 if you're lucky. You've got PC Gamer, Play, and Edge. Maybe and Retro Gamer is still going, but that's not not magazine in terms of the up to date game stuff. You look at any other sector or almost any other sector of hobbies or entertainment, lifestyle or whatever. most of them have still have a ton of magazines. There are still large magazine sections, not as large as they used to be, but there are still large magazine sections for entire other audiences. And I'm intrigued. I'd be intrigued to work out why games, as popular as video games are now, and they're more mainstream and more popular than they ever have been. Magazines, for one, have just declined completely, and that I guess everyone's has shifted a long time ago to be getting their news and opinions and stuff on video games online. But yeah, just traditional games media it's a really difficult time at the moment.
Yeah, magazines is interesting, isn't it? Because there are still film magazines like Empire and stuff that are in total film, and that hasn't translated to games quite so well. I do wonder if it's the nature of games. And how the siloed nature of it, the fact that there are PC gamers and then there's console gamers, whereas if you're into films, it's all in one space, sort of thing. There's also a lot more to talk about, and it's also more ubiquitous. Like gaming. The audience that are really into games, that are buying games magazines, are probably the most online group of people you can imagine. There is an awful lot of, true. And there's a lot of people. My mum loves films, and she doesn't read about them on Empire Online. By the way, CVG went for 34 years. But it was an online publication at the end only. There's two. It starts as Game Informer is a magazine. Magazines have been sort of killed off the internet. One of the big things about Game Informer, if you remember, they used to have the biggest announcements, right? And nowadays, when you try and make an announcement, you try and make it global. Game Informer is a US brand. And if I remember, at one point, it was the 5th biggest magazine in the whole of the US. Not the 5th biggest games magazine, the 5th biggest magazine. It was that's how widely it reached. And if you wanted to get a game announced, put it on the cover of Game Informer. And they used to have quite strict rules, which, again, I'm from a business media, I've never worked in consumer media, where that meant that if you announce a game on Game Informer, that's where you announced it. You didn't put it on IGN as well and stuff. Now IGN do things like IGN First, so they've got their own competitor version of it. And now companies are increasingly announcing things just through their own directs and their own videos and their own. So it's that sort of element of what Game Informer did sort of faded away. And I think the problem Game Informer has is that the other option is you get people to pay for it. And this honestly, I think media is broken. So I think, for starters, the internet killed games magazines. It hasn't completely killed games magazines. As you're right, there's still prestige games publications, there's still Kickstarter games publications, Edge. I subscribe to Retro Gamer. I'm completely on board with that. And I think specialist games publications do work because there are people who are willing to pay for those. I'll come back onto that. But consumer games, and then now we've got online games media, which is being killed by Google. And and the thing is, not just being killed by Google in terms of how those public. So those that don't know, by the way, I realise lots of different people read. Online media is paid for by advertising. There's lots of different forms of advertising online, but there's two main ones. There's direct advertising, where someone like Activision gives IGN a chunk of money to stick Call of Duty on every page, and then there's programmatic advertising, which is those advert. You've been looking at sheds, and somehow sheds are all around your latest article about this website. That's a programmatic ad. That's Google has tracked you and is putting ads in front of you via its things. With those ads, publications get a cut of the money from those advertising, and so the more traffic they get, the more money they make, which really means the focus is always on eyeballs, getting as many people to click on things as possible. And that leads to such rubbish sometimes. And not, to be fair, journalists don't want to do this. But it's happened to me this morning. I was on Facebook. I have no idea why I'm still on Facebook, because there's almost nothing on there now but ads. And there was a thing coming up, I think it was The Independent, saying Jenna Ortega, I must have been looking at a Tim Burton thing because of Beetlejuice, whatever. Jenna Ortega says, "Leave us alone about Johnny Depp dating." And I'm sitting there going, what? Like, she's like 5 and he's like 100. What's this? What the hell? Anyway, and I fell for it and I clicked on the link. It was an established publication, and of course somebody said to her, "Are you sure you're dating Johnny Depp?" She went, "No, what are you talking about? Just leave us alone. What's wrong with you?" So she denied it, but of course they thought, "Oh, that's not going to get me many clicks." It's
to the extent that I know for a fact a couple of other publications do longer headlines because they know that whatever device you're reading them on, you won't quite get the end of the headline. So they write it in a way that intrigues you enough to just click to find out what the end of the headline is. Not even to find what the headline refers to, just find out what the end of the sentence is. Yeah, and that's how it's getting.
And that's the game. Like, by the way, publications, this is not... You can sit there and go, the game, media's got rubbish. It's the game they have to play. And they have to play because we as society, don't pay for our media. We expect it for free now. And so therefore they're having to find ways of making money. And Google decides who makes the money and who doesn't based on their algorithms. So they're playing to the game. They're playing to the algorithm, which is and now they're sticking AI in it. So in fact, if you Google, is Jenny Ortega dating Donny Depp, Google will flash up a big no. So you don't even have to go on the ad. And it's the and that's probably a good thing because I feel like I was tricked into reading the article. But that's just, I think that's ruining media, but also you'll get into this situation where we look at publications and you go, right, so now if I'm trying to find how do I beat this boss in Elden Ring, and you Google it and Google will tell you before you even clicked on the article that they've pulled the answer from. Or even Microsoft's talking about doing the same thing in the games. So you can sit there, so rather than leaving the game and getting your phone out to work out how to complete this level, you can. And guides is where a lot of games media makes a lot of its traffic from. This year is okay.
PlayStation. No, just a further example. PlayStation does that with the the little activity cards. Like you literally be in the section of the game. You just hit the home button, and there's likely a little video card that will show you what to do in that section.
Yeah, and
you don't even have to look at your phone.
I think that might be self-created, but that's what I mean. They're getting to the point where the consoles are putting that into their offering, which is going to impact games media. Games media make money from the traffic that guides bring in. Traffic, and then so AI sort of impact is impacting that. Then you've also got the reality of this year is particularly brutal. Like for starters, everyone's got a lot less money, so they're being very, very mindful of what they spend. So marketing budgets are being heavily scrutinised. The second thing from that is that people who book advertising around consumer media tend to be bigger businesses. If you're an indie developer or an indie publisher who's only got a little bit of marketing budget, it's probably not best to spend it all on a takeover on Eurogame. Probably best looking at Discord and community and building up that word of mouth and that kind of stuff. If you've got a bit more money, great. You can play in that bigger playground. But if you're a smaller budget, it's probably not your first port of call. This year, if you look at the lineup of games that have come out this year, we don't have any obvious games that's going to have a big consumer media budget. So direct advertising is challenged this year because of the lineup, but also because of the lineup. There are fewer games that are driving, like guides games, like Elden Ring, and like Zelda, and those sort of things, to drive traffic to these websites anyway. So I suspect for a lot of games websites, their traffic might be down. So their traffic's down, which means they make less money from programmatic. There's less money coming in from direct advertising. They're under all these pressures from Google and all these other wider issues around China. And you sit there and you think, how is it going to survive? Now, that sounds super negative, but there are media publications that are, I believe, I use this example. I subscribe to 2 magazines. I still get magazines. I get 2. I get Retro Gamer, because Retro Gamer have a whole lot of features in that magazine that is never going to get any traffic, but I find fascinating, right? Like, I was reading one the other day and I found out that HAL, the video game, the developer HAL, that closely associated with Nintendo. Do you know why it's called HAL?
I do, but I can't remember now.
It's because they want to be better than IBM, so that it's just the letter ahead of IBM. And I was sitting, that's amazing. And I just was fascinated. I found that out in the middle of an article in Retro Gamer the other week, and I love it because it has. And I also get Doctor Who magazine. Doctor Who magazine really goes into depth about like the filming approaches to Doctor Who episodes from the 70s. Nobody's clicking on that. Nobody's making programmatic advertising. The only way those articles exist is if I pay for them, and that is what. And you see that as well. I pay for Simon Carlos's newsletter, so sort of, I guess he might be one of our competitors in a way. I pay for that newsletter because he goes really in depth into game performances on Steam, and it's not my strongest area. I'm really fascinated by it. He's not me. If he puts that out as somebody has to pay for that kind of insight and analysis. You're not getting that for, I'm happy to pay for that. And I think specialism in certain areas allows it. We're quite lucky at GI in a way, though we do have our own challenges, in that we are about a specific audience. So our goal is to, our goal is to create stuff that that our audience wants to read. And we did an entire South Africa games special back in February, which probably got, I can't remember the exact numbers, but in the low tens of thousands of readers. And some people go, that IGN would look at that and go, what? Why are you even bothering? Why are you putting so much effort into that? But I guarantee you we hit the whole South Africa games industry and anyone that's interested in that industry. And if you are, and from a commercial business point of view, if you're a person that wants to advertise to South African game developers, well, that's the thing to be involved with. GI's got that audience now because that's what we did. So, but that's us because we're very specialist and we've got to create stuff that's good in our audience and the audience that we're targeting wants, and they won't like it if we did. You won't believe what Xbox's sales figures were for Q1. They wouldn't react very well to that. So we've got to be, we've got to do good stuff.
Tempting as that is sometimes to run just a flipping headline like that.
Was it source it roses are red? So we saw a headline.
It was game developer did it, like roses are red, meta is blue. Reality Labs lost $4.5 billion in Q2.
Yeah, well,
it's superb headline.
But it was. I don't understand that, but it was funny. Yeah. But and I'm all for. So we're quite lucky in that we don't have to play a lot of those games, but we do still have to a little bit. When our we've still got to hit certain numbers. I do think there's a difference between. I think people use clickbait a lot to describe things that just mean slightly sensational. I don't mind people doing exciting headlines. I think that's great. But But I just feel I look at the media. I think the only way the media gets out of the situation is if we can get audience to pay for it. The audiences won't pay.
No.
And I've got a friend of mine who runs a load of newspapers in the UK, and he says that he runs the subscription side of it. And he said the money I make from subscriptions amounts to about 5% of our total revenue. That's a big, so that's the point. So very bleak. Game Informer is also a magazine, and it was, I guess, trying to transition that into an online world dominated by polygons and GameSpots and IGNs and stuff is going to be really difficult. But sorry, quite bleak, really, isn't it?
It's quite bleak. I'd love to end on an optimistic note, but I think we have run out of time. I think we're pushing 45 minutes, if not, we're past it already. So this is the longest Microcast we've done to date, for which we apologise. But there was a lot to go through this week. This is what happens when Chris and I take time off.
Yeah. I don't know if people really think Microcasts are supposed to be short anymore. I think we've recalibrated expectations.
I do wonder about that. I enjoy the name Microcast, but it just doesn't mean anything anymore. It's just a podcast. We're micro in that we're not one of those that goes on for 2 to 3 hours. That's how podcast has become. Thank you so much for joining us, whether it's via YouTube or the podcasting platform of your choice. You can find us on the podcasting platform of your choice by searching the GamesIndustry.biz podcast. You can get more news, insight and analysis into all of these stories and more at GamesIndustry.biz. We're going to be back next week, possibly with a shorter show and possibly with better mics. We are currently working behind the scenes on improving the quality of the show.
I would call it a mini relaunch.
A mini relaunch?
Yeah, well, we've been doing this. We're doing this weekly now for 6 months, 7, and we're going to take a lot of the feedback and we're going to do something a little different. It's still going to be this podcast, just maybe a bit.
It is.
Maybe a little bit more, maybe a little different.
We will keep you posted. In the meantime, we'll see you next week. Thank you so much for joining us.